Hi, this is Anonymous Bells. I'm Megan Turner with Colleen Alice, and we're talking about, as we always do, fiction, writing, and advice for writers. Um, Today, we're going to talk about the short story and specifically about length and how you decide sort of form versus long form. And we'll also talk a little bit about Colleen's latest story collection, Close to the Flame. Um, yeah, so Colleen, I'm going to have you kind of start it off, I guess. But what do you think about what are the strengths of the short story? Sort of why do you write in the short form? How is it beneficial as a writer, etc.?
Yeah, and thank you for saying it might be my only this book might be it might be my only collection of short stories. We'll see because I haven't written a short story since this came out. I don't know what that portends, but I really got my start with fiction writing short stories, and probably I'm guessing you did too.
Mhm.
Um, but I just remember having a really great kind of breakthrough moment when I was in taking a creative writing class as an undergrad at Michigan State, where I was writing a short story, and then I just kind of it was like 3,000 words, and I thought it was done, but then like I had this thought of like, well, what if I opened up this other avenue? And then the story like tripled in length. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I see. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment where you start to realize that a story can be as layered and as long as the themes warrant or as the material warrants. And I saw a way to go really deep. And that story wound up in this collection. Although now it's shorter, I did wind up making some cuts eventually. But I just really like the way that a short story gets you to think about what is the essence of what you're trying to say, and you're honing the
Mhm.
story in terms of zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, and you're making that decision. Um, and yeah, in contrast to writing a novel, there's just so I mean, you can still say a lot, of course, but it just you wind up saying it so differently, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most writers, especially if you do an MFA, you start with the short story, and I think it's just because it's easier to talk, to talk about in the length of like, of time that you have.
Yeah.
Um, but I think one of my professors once said something about like you can't really, there's not really room for error in a short story. Like
Mhm.
you have to be so careful in a way because every sort of line of dialogue matters. Every scene matters. You can't have something in there that just doesn't make sense. Whereas like in a novel, sometimes there might be a weird scene in there or something that you just okay, like but it's a really like practice kind of form, and I think it takes a lot to be really good at a short story. Um, so yeah, I think it's like a good teaching tool. And I'm always kind of like, I feel like some people who are starting off, they just want to start with the novel, but I think you can learn so much from writing a short story that I'm sort of, try it. And like, well, what am I going to do with that? But I think it's that's sort of just the way to learn. And
Mhm.
there are some authors who just stick with the short story and they're just so good at it. I don't think I'm one of those. You know? um, yeah. So Colleen, I think you already talked about like length, but I wanted to like touch on that a little more about like sort of how did you decide like when you were going from a short story to a novel, like sort of what was different and how did you kind of make that leap um, from like one sort of length to another. Yeah.
Yeah, I made that leap clumsily, very ungracefully. But what I did do was, and I'm sure we've talked about this, the NaNoWriMo, where you have a
Mhm.
challenge to write 50,000 words in a month.
Mhm.
And so I did that, and I did that once or twice, and I did it, but like I thought the pieces were really bad because I think that they were. And then I did it in 2018, and it's just that game of sitting down at the computer, and you have to write 1,600 words every day. So then you think, okay, well then what? Well then what? Well then what? And you just keep going. And that was instructive for me to learn how to just keep going. So that one I landed at 50,000 words, and I thought that that one was like, I was like, for the first time, I was like, oh, I like this story. And
Mhm.
then, of course, there's a lot of work to do to take it over the finish line of like 70,000 or 75 or something like that. But that one did become my first novel.
Yeah.
But I know it just sounds so cliche to say this, but I think you just learn by doing. I really do.
Mhm.
Um, I think you just start. And I think the other thing is you have to listen to, like when I'm saying my first two attempts were real terrible, I was willing to scrap them. One of them I did salvage into a short story. So sometimes, I don't know. As I get further into the writing journey, this is happening to me less, but in the early days, I was just wrong so wildly about length and scope and things. So happily, I think I'm wrong less now. But if you're doing it and you're like, wow, I'm just off and I'm wrong and I thought it was this, but it's that, I think that's good. I think that's encouraging. And I think that means you're learning and you're doing the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, I feel like the pacing is, or I guess now that I've been doing it a while, like the pacing has to be clear from like the first sentence that you kind of set like
Mhm.
like what is the length going to be from that, even maybe the first paragraph. But I think when you're in the short story, it feels like, okay, this is going to be really condensed, or I'm going to be like really just expanding, expanding, expanding. And it's harder for me now. I think I went through the same process as you. Like the first sort of novel attempt was really short. And I was like, well, 50,000, that's pretty good compared, it's like you're writing from 3,000 or, maybe 5,000 words up to like 50,000. It's such a huge leap. And nobody really sort of teaches you how to do that. And now I like 80, 90,000 for a novel. And I feel like it's so much harder for me to go back. And like I used to be so short, like my short stories were like 1,500 words or something. And now it's like I feel like I can't get under 5,000. So um, but yeah, to me, like the pacing, like your sort of intent as a writer has to be clear from that first line, maybe like a paragraph or two, but it feels like you've set that up for the reader already.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. It feels like such a different form to me now.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know about you, but I feel more comfortable in the novel space now. So, but I feel like, yeah,
Yeah, I'm worried that that's what's happened to me too now is that, yeah, now it's harder to go back. I just haven't also had any ideas for short stories. To be honest with you, but what you said too about making everything count really resonates because I also write quite a bit of poetry, and that's the same thing. Every word matters, every punctuation choice matters, every line break matters. And if you can't justify the choice, then it's like an indicator that you should probably take it out. So I think too, writing a lot of poetry helps me write short stories. Those things
yeah,
kind of go hand in hand. But I'm even scared to mention the other thing, which is actually lately, and maybe this is a conversation for another time. Lately, I've been digging novellas, which is
yeah,
the
yeah,
sweet spot in between. So I don't know. I really like a novella these days.
um,
Really long short story, but not the commitment of a novel, not the stakes, not the scope. So that's again,
yeah.
let's save that
It's
for another
interesting.
day.
It's interesting about the classification because I think there are a lot of authors like Hemingway. Some of his stuff has got to be like a novella, but it's like so just let's
Yeah,
call it a novel, but it's really like too really short. Like but it's tough as a writer establishing yourself. I think like it feels like there isn't as much to me like room for the novella, or they people are like, what's a novella? Like, but it's interesting to hear you talk about that and to like think about that as a form. Um, anyway, let's talk
yeah.
about. Sorry, you.
Oh yeah, no, like isn't the Great Gatsby, isn't it the anniversary of the Great Gatsby this week? And like that's a short novel,
Yeah,
so
yeah. There are a lot
totally
of short novels, so
different.
it's interesting to think about. I kind of feel like as you get more established as a writer, that there's more flexibility in terms of like the length. So that's my thought about. I don't know if I'm right, but
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. But I think that's part of the joy of the discovery is figuring out what does the story want from you? Is the story asking you to make it shorter or longer or somewhere in the middle? And I think
yeah,
that's just, again, something you just learn by doing.
listening to it as you, yeah, like. Um, so let's before we, I don't know, run out of time. Let's talk about. I don't know if we're running out of time, but we can talk about your collection and I don't know. Can you tell us a little bit about it and kind of what prompted it and maybe like sort of some of your favorite stories in the collection?
Sure. Yeah, it only came out in March. It's called Close to a Flame. The publisher is Cornerstone Press, which is the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point,
Mhm.
and they're lovely. They published my debut poetry collection too. And so I had a relationship with Dr. Ross there, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I have like 16 short stories, and I feel like they go together really well." And he was like, "Great." And I was like, okay, okay. So I started the roots of this where it was the short story I mentioned, the one I wrote as an undergrad. So that story is in here. It's called The Only Private Place. And then 6 of the 16 stories kind of experiment a little bit with following like interconnectedness. So there are two women characters, two friends, and 6 of the stories trace their journey through the years.
Mhm.
I'm also really interested in this idea of novel and short story,
Yeah.
um, short stories that are all linked in this way with similar characters. I think that's really satisfying. I didn't have enough to do a whole book on the two of them, and I didn't feel called to keep going with them to that point. So it's
Mhm.
interwoven. But I would say the common thread of all the short stories is relationships, often romantic, but sometimes deep friendships. And so I'm playing with that theme throughout the 16 stories.
Yeah, I like, I mean, I feel like whenever I read your short stories that I feel like a real closeness to it feels like they're real people in a way that they just feel like they're dealing with ordinary things, but that it's someone that you potentially know and encounter in like in real life, which doesn't, I don't know if that's always true, like it feels like really approachable in that way. So, um, yeah, and some of them are sort of just put into embarrassing situations. I'm thinking of like strays and like so where they're kind of like, and I don't know if that's true, but like it seems like you have kind of a younger protagonist usually,
Mhm.
or like college, at least for these stories, college student. Um, so I could sort of relate to that kind of feeling of
Yeah.
embarrassment or like discomfort in a way. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you. I was joking that the alternate title for the book could be like stupid stuff I did in my 20s. Oh no, not really. Some of them go into motherhood, but yeah, I don't know. Now I'm hoping to get called to write another short story. I don't know. Maybe I'm done. I don't know if I just need space from it or if I'll come back to it. But
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I kind of go back and forth. To me, like what's really helpful is when I'm writing a novel to have like breaks from it. And so
mm,
I feel like I start writing a short story or an essay more recently, when I feel like I need like a couple of days away from this book and I just need to do something slightly different. And I think that's really helpful to me as a writer to have like something else I'm working on that's kind of
yeah.
not necessarily another novel, but like something that's like, I don't know. I always encourage my like students to do this is to have like that kind of like free write time and time to like just kind of play. And so I think I use the short story now as like a way to experiment in a way that I feel sometimes it's tougher to do in a novel because you're like so far into it and you can be like, maybe the next novel is going to be something new, but it feels like you kind of have to stick with what you've already established and stay the course. But I think with a short story, you have like freedom to try something that, in a short space that like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, like,
Yeah.
so that's how I kind of think of it now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like a palate cleanser, just a different modality for your brain to take a
Mhm.
break. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we should talk
Anyway.
about flash fiction some other time too,
Oh
and you can
gosh.
explain what flash fiction is to me.
Something I'm not particularly good at.
I can't do flash. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember at some point being in school and like one of my advisors or someone said, I guess you're really just like a short story writer and you're so like succinct and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I just kind of threw that out. Like, never mind. Gonna go novel.
Go
Um,
the other way. Yeah.
um, yeah, but yeah, I think there's more to talk about, but I think some of it will come up in later discussions. But Colleen, anything else to add before we sign off?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for letting me talk about my short story collection. It still feels pretty new to me. So
Yeah,
I'm
everyone
just,
check it out.
yeah, I'm still hearing from readers. That's fun. And yeah, so hopefully we'll get to keep sharing it going forward.
Yeah, so until next time, keep writing. We'll see
Yeah,
you next time.
keep writing.
All right.
That's not what we say. Okay, all right.